Hey everyone, it's Dee from CatalystEnergies. Thanks for joining me. I'm really grateful that you're here for the full moon report, which is happening on December 12th, 2019 at 12:12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So for those of us on the West Coast, it's going to be on the 11th at 9:12 p.m., a considerably less exciting numerological time, but still this full moon, I've been sitting on it all day in terms of getting ready for this report, and it's coming in hot and it's coming in strong. And it's the last full moon, not only of the year, but it's the last full moon of the decade. And so the next moon cycle that we experience is going to be in eclipse season. And so that's going to be on that Cancer Capricorn axis and really emphasize the Capricorn energy that all these planets are coming into as we move into 2020 and beyond. So the full moon is in Gemini, which means that the moon is in Gemini and the sun is in Sagittarius, which is the opposing sign. And so we're going to focus on the axis of Gemini and Sagittarius, knowledge versus understanding. And we're also going to focus on the transits and of that are coming before this new moon today. There is such a strong connection to Chiron with this full moon. Chiron is going to station direct on the same day as the full moon on the 12th later in the day and is going to square the moon in Cancer right before then. And there was such a strong connection with Mercury and Chiron and the moon yesterday that it is a huge overtone to what's going on with this full moon in terms of our woundedness, our original wound, and how we can heal ourselves from that wound and move on. So let's get into it. I'm going to bring up the chart for the full moon. All right, cool. So we have the sun at 19 degrees 51 minutes of Sagittarius opposing the moon at 19 degrees and 51 minutes Gemini. So let's start here with this aspect of Gemini and Sagittarius, because I think this is really worth understanding in order to understand how the full moon is going to play out in everybody's life in some way, shape, or form. So when we talk about Gemini and Sagittarius, we're talking about an air sign, Gemini, and we're talking about a mutable air sign and a mutable fire sign, Sagittarius. They are the opposites of each other. Gemini is the acquisition of information. It is empiricism. It is often referred to as it is the ruler of the third house, which has to do with communication. It's often explained as communication, short-term travel, things like that. But really what it is about when we're talking about the cycle of individuation through the houses is that the third house and Gemini has to do with the actual pieces of information, the knowledge itself. It is the data points that are being collected. When we have a moon in Gemini, when we're talking about the moon, which is the feminine, internal, subconscious, the aspects of ourselves that are within and are only illuminated by the sun, the moon doesn't have her own source of light. She only shines from our vantage point when she is reflecting the sun's light. So these are the elements about us that are internal. It's about how we feel. And because the moon moves around the earth every month, in a full orbit, then it has a lot to do with our moods as well, because those are always shifting and changing based on what we are interacting with in our environment, either externally or internally, which is a very normal aspect of being human. We all have moods and they all shift, and it has a lot to do with what we're interacting with. So when we have a moon in Gemini, this tends to be a restless mental energy internally about how we feel. There's a curiosity here, but there's also a fickleness. There is an inability to really come to a decision about anything. And that is because Gemini is about the collection of information. It is about the knowledge itself. It is about the actual structure of the language, the symbols that we incorporate in order to later understand the bigger picture. So the reason that the third house has to do with the aspect of communication and short-term travel and our communication with like siblings and close family is because it is about the actual, it's like practicing those skills. It is the way we communicate based on the information that we're gathering. And so in the wheel of the zodiac, the first house being the seed point of the I am that I am, and the second house being the medium in which this seed point finds itself, the soil in which it's planted. The third house is germination. And this is the first moment of realization of differentiation of opposites. It is the idea that it is one in the same. We are one in the same. Subject and object are from the same source, but there is a separation into polar opposites. It's the yin, it's the realization of the yin and the yang of reality. And so when we come to a point of differentiation, this is where information is able to flow. And if you think of information as kind of like electricity in some ways, the way that electricity works is through magnetism. And magnetism is based on the idea of opposite charges attracting each other. And so there's this quote from Jung that I wrote down. I'd love to find it. That is about, there is no consciousness without a realization of differentiation. So we are collecting information. Gemini is collecting information about the world around us. It's how we make sense of the world around us. It is grammar school. It is learning the language. It is how we are able to conceptualize that there is a difference between myself and other. Now, this is all very esoteric and kind of meta, but the way that it can be translated into how a person interacts with themselves and the world around them is that it is the data that is coming in. And the data that's coming in, eventually, when you get around the cycle of the zodiac to Sagittarius, its polarity point, which is about understanding, is about the big picture, it is about philosophy, is about religion. It is alchemizing those data points that have come in through the collection and during Gemini. It's just a good empiricist, a good scientist is not going to come to any conclusions necessarily until all the data is collected. And then you get to Virgo, where it's analyzed, right? Another Mercury ruled sign. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. And it's once the analyzing happens, then you get around to the Sagittarius energy that is the alchemist. It is taking the information, the analysis of the information, and transmuting it into some sort of higher understanding. So this is the polarity that we're working with the full moon, because the light of the sun is in Sagittarius, and it's going to be shining on the moon, giving light, making visible what otherwise may not be entirely visible to us because it's internal, it's in our subconscious. It has more to do with what we feel rather than what's in our conscious mind. Now, the moon has been in Gemini now for the last day or so, and there is this restlessness about not wanting to come to any decisions or any conclusions. We just keep gathering information about how we feel, about what's going on for us internally, who we are internally, like our feminine nature, our mother nature in some ways. The sun in Sagittarius is incredibly optimistic. It is all about, and especially at this degree point, it is about what you can procure from your environment, like overcoming obstacles and using them as any opportunity to be greater and to gather what you need to for the betterment of the collective, not just for yourself. When we're in Gemini, this is still about the individual. So it's really about how the individual is able to look at the world around him or her. It is the filter through which sensory and perception is going in and out. It is, so that has a lot to do with how we understand a reality, coming around to Sagittarius. Now, if we have a filter that is all about, you know, when certain things happen, this is what I expect, or like I am a victim of these things, or my self-worth. I mean, you can just put any situation into that. And if that is your filter, you're going to project that back out. And then eventually it's going to be how you understand your bigger picture of reality. And so right now with the moon in Gemini, we are gathering so much information, and in some ways it can feel restless because we don't want to come to any conclusions. But the sun shining here, the full moon, is going to bring it all up to the surface. It's going to shine the light of Sagittarius, of understanding and higher understanding, onto all of these pieces of information that we keep collecting about ourselves, about how we feel, about, you know, what's going on for us internally, how we relate to the world around us. Now, let's go backwards a little bit before this full moon happens, because there is a significant transit that's happening earlier in the day on the 11th, that is Venus conjuncting Saturn. And you can see right here in this chart, which is at the time of the full moon, Venus has just come off Saturn at 20 degrees and Saturn is at 19 degrees. So I want to share the Sabian symbol for 20 degrees of Capricorn, because I think it really symbolizes so well what Venus conjuncting with Saturn in Capricorn can really represent. The fact that they're conjuncting at this particular degree, I think, is so beautiful and is so illustrative of that energy in general. And so the Sabian symbol is a hidden choir, and it's the imagery is about the fact that in a collective worship situation, like a church, for instance, if you've ever been in a church there with a choir, the choir is singing a hymn, or there's some sort of harmonic resonance with what the choir is presenting, and it's for the collective, it's for the community's collective worship of what they're there to worship: God, creator, source, whatever, however you want to conceptualize this. The choir is there for this purpose. Now, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. You have to practice. You need a director. There needs to be an arrangement that works. And the fact that the choir is hidden suggests that it's not about the choir and what they're showing up to provide. They have put the work and time and practice into creating this harmonic resonance for the collective, for the community's worship. Right? And that's what Capricorn is about showing up. It's about hard work. It's about diligence. It's about creating a structure for the collective. That's why it stretches out to mean government institutions. It's very much about a paternal, father-like energy. It's very materialistic. It is about the structure that is created to contain something for the community, for the collective. Venus is harmonic resonance. Venus is the sacred feminine in physical form. She rules Taurus. So relationships, love, projects, material resources, in terms of what feels good, what appeals to the senses, what is harmonious. Venus is about harmony. So when you think about harmony in music, it's such a Venus quality because it is a vibratory experience, which is a physical experience. It is something that can be physically created. music, harmony, even with your own voice or voices. It's something that's physically created. It's appealing to the senses. It feels good. It connects to the feminine aspect of us. And so to have Venus conjuncting with Saturn, which is responsibility, especially in Capricorn, like the ultimate responsibility, to have this energy conjuncting in this sign or in this symbol for the choir, I just can't get over it, how perfect it is. And so depending on where these aspects are, where Capricorn is in your chart, the harmonic resonance is going to be, there's such a potential here to take responsibility for what you're showing up with to the collective, but in a way that's beautiful and and appeals to not only your senses but your feminine sensibilities, that what feels good to you. It's just harmonic resonance. And I think if we're able to really connect with that earlier in the day and really resonate with that energy, then the moon, the full moon, is going to be a real opportunity to see what kind of information we have allowed ourselves to collect inside of ourselves, in how we feel, in our intuition, our subconscious, the internalized aspects that we don't often really consciously consider. And the sun being so optimistic and shining that light onto the moon to bring it all to the surface. Now, there's no drive necessarily to make any decisions right now, because as soon as the full moon happens, then the moon goes void off course, still in Gemini, right? So there's still going to be more data collection, but now that the moon is void off course, we really want to take a step back and like absorb what's happened, and absorbed what kind of information has come in, what kind of understanding has come about because of the full moon, and really sit on it, meditate with it, like not necessarily moving forward with it. Now, before, so we have this Venus conjunct Saturn, then we have the moon in Gemini, quincunx or in conjunct Mars in Scorpio. So the fickleness and the lack of decisiveness is so, it is in conjunct with Mars and Scorpio. Mars is going for what he wants, and it's not about what he wants, but it's about what we want. It's about what the collective wants, and it's about getting to the bottom of things in the darker, deeper waters, and at any cost, really. And so there is an opportunity here with an in conjunct for a breakthrough. And again, this is right before the full moon. And so there could be some, it really depends on which way you want to go with it. But the fact that these two aspects don't line up at all with each other gives an opportunity to conceptualize something more, something else besides either this or that. There's no real, it's okay to keep collecting information. Like I said, a true empiricist is not going to come to conclusions about anything until that data has been analyzed and then is able to be alchemized, synthesized into a higher understanding. Mars doesn't care about any of that. Mars is just going right in. He's getting right to the bottom. He's bypassing all of that, in Scorpio, because and that's, you need to go through Scorpio to get to Sagittarius, to get to that higher understanding. But he's not even bothering with the data collection. He's just going for it. And so that's something to really keep in mind and watch out for. Right after that, the moon in Gemini also squaring Neptune. Neptune wants us to merge back with source. Is about, especially right now, is about inspiration, the flow of inspiration, the dreams, the fantasies, dissolving back into source. And then the moon again in Gemini curious, not really interested necessarily in dissolving back into source. It's more about like, ooh, what else can I consider? What else? Oh, this over here, this over here. Let me take this and integrate it, take this and integrate it. And you just keep taking more stuff in and taking more stuff in. Neptune in Pisces is definitely a stronger energy. So when you have these two aspects at odds with each other, or they're on perpendicular trajectories, one's going one way, one's going the other, the one that's stronger and in its dignity is usually going to present much more of a presence. And so it's very possible that we can get pulled into that space. But right after that is when the moon is full and the sun is shining on the moon, the full moon in Gemini, and letting us know that we have collected so much information. Like, it's almost to the point where we have everything that we need in terms of how to move forward. And maybe we've been a little bit unsure of ourselves because we want to be good little scientists in terms of ourselves. We want to keep collecting information. And the sun is showing us how much that we've collected. And it's important to stay connected to that and not get pulled back into source absolutely and completely, because that is also the world of delusions and illusion. And so not being realistic about what's going on is definitely a possibility if we are not aware of what it is we have been gathering in Gemini, the moon in Gemini, this whole time. Once the full moon happens, we have another inconjunct or a quincunx with Saturn. And as the full moon, oh, that's before that. Sorry, I'm getting my times mixed up. So then we have an inconjunct with Saturn in Capricorn. Again, Capricorn is all about responsibility and paternal, like, I know what's best for you and I'm going to do it. And there's no getting around that. And so again, the moon, it's going to provide an opportunity for a breakthrough with the moon just in that Gemini, kind of restless, fickle, not really ready to commit to anything because she's just still gathering information. And if we've like really connected with that Venus conjuncting with Saturn, I don't feel like, because Venus and the moon are so closely linked together, I feel like that inconjunct can really be utilized for a positive breakthrough rather than feeling like completely out of whack or out of balance. And then the moon happens, the full moon happens, and then the moon goes void off course, still in Gemini, and then also in conjuncts with all this other Capricorn energy, with Venus in Capricorn and then in Pluto in Capricorn, before she moves into Cancer tomorrow afternoon on the West Coast, early evening on the East Coast, the moon into Cancer. And this is where it's going to get interesting, because that moon in Cancer is going to square Chiron in Aries. And then right after that, that is when Chiron goes direct. So Chiron in Aries, I've talked about this so much, the original wound to the ego, to the self, to the I am that I am. And it's just been Chiron's been pretty stationary now for a minute. It is slowed down to almost a complete stop and is going to go direct. And of course, it's not slowing down and stopping. That's impossible. But from our vantage point, the orbit appears to be slowing down and stopping, because it's going to then change direction. And wherever this Chiron wound is in your chart, and for the collective, being that it's in Aries, this stuff is going to just shoot right up to the surface as far as I'm concerned. And with a moon in Cancer, moon is at home in Cancer. Cancer is about, so we're going from our mind in Gemini straight down into our sacrum, into our womb, into the waters of our emotional security. And the moon being there, now talk about moodiness. You think moon in Gemini is moody. That's just kind of fickle, can't really make a decision. Sometimes that can be expressed as moodiness. People with moon in Gemini can seem moody, because really it's almost like being two-faced, because they can be one and the other at the same time. That is kind of the positive aspect of Gemini is that Gemini recognizes that you are one and the same, and also separation. And those two are not mutually exclusive. And so a moon and Gemini person can appear moody and not in like a good headspace, and at the very same time, depending on the environment, could seem completely social and wonderful, which is a very hard aspect to deal with as far as I'm concerned. And nothing, if you're moon in Gemini, I mean, it is a power. It is a skill to be able to do both of those things, I think, if you harness it correctly. Anyway, but then the moon in Cancer, we're getting into our emotional security. We're getting into our vulnerability. We're getting into the mother in the mother, the moon in the sign of the mother, the womb, squaring Chiron. Chiron is the original mother wound. Oh my gosh. And then with Chiron stationing direct right after, it's going to shoot right up. And so it is, I think, imperative that we are very mindful about what's going on for us, what kind of information we're collecting, how that information is then being transmitted out again, how it shapes our perception of the world, and eventually shapes our understanding and big picture when it comes to not just us, but the collective, the world around us too. We have so much at our disposal. We've collected so much. Actually, the Sabian symbol for the degree of the moon at the full moon, it's 19 degrees, 51 minutes of Gemini, so it would be 20 degrees. Gemini is a cafeteria, supply, effectiveness of requisition in all personal relationships. When you go into a cafeteria, everything is put out. It's like a buffet. You have everything that you need. It's all there. It's been collected. All you have to do is go around and, pile stuff onto your tray, or take what's there and put it on your tray, and then you go eat with the group, right? We have everything we need, and we've collected all of this information, and the sun is going to shine on that understanding. Well, it is the understanding. The sun is the understanding. It is giving us a gift of understanding that we do have everything that we need, and it allows us to overcome anything and capitalize on every situation that comes our way in order to utilize it for the good of not just us, but for the collective. And if we can really tap into and harness this moon and release the need to like keep collecting information, then when the moon comes around to square Chiron and then Chiron goes direct, we will not be knocked on our ass. That's because it's powerful. The mother wound, the Chiron original wound, is so powerful because the wound is the essence of who he is. Chiron is wounded because of who he is, right? He was born immortal because of a rape from Kronos and his mother. His mother abandoned him, disowned him because of the shame, right? And then Apollo raised him as his own and taught him everything. And Chiron was a gifted healer. He was able to heal because of the original wound, which was his immortality, and because Apollo would have never adopted him if he hadn't been cast away by his mother. Kronos is like, beyond that. There's no nurturing with Kronos. He just goes for what he wants, and there's no getting around that. Chiron had to surrender the thing that made him a brilliant healer, which was his magic immortality, godlike status. I mean, Apollo taught him things, but it was really because of what he had internally that made him so gifted. When he was wounded by Hercules' arrow, he was in so much pain because he couldn't die because of and he couldn't heal himself either. He had to surrender. He had to surrender himself, his immortality, in order to find true release from his pain. And we keep recycling this wound, this mother wound, over and over and over. And in some ways, it has allowed us to be incredibly gifted, some of us incredibly gifted healers, because we understand, we feel the wound based on our own experience. And so whatever it is for you, whatever house it's in for you, for me, it's Chiron is in my third house. So, it's not Gemini in my chart, but it is the Gemini ruled house. So I've thought a lot about this in terms of the wound around the information, the way that the knowledge that I am able to not only take in, but also how I project it out into the world. It shapes your understanding down the line when it comes to the bigger picture. So if you don't get that straightened out, everything else around the wheel is impacted. Especially at Sagittarius, when you're thinking about the big picture, you can, if you don't get your Chiron wound, if you're not figuring it out, understanding it, coming to terms with it, things can become very dogmatic, judgmental. There's a warped, what you create and transmute in Sagittarius is not necessarily for the greater good. It is usually re-wounding yourself, I think. That's my personal take on it. And with the moon coming into Cancer, squaring Chiron, and then Chiron going direct, I mean, this is just so deep and heavy. And then after this full moon, we go into the eclipse cycle, and we go into 2020, and at this point, it's all Capricorn. How are we going to show up? Like, what are we going to create? Like, the diligence, the hard work. And if our perception and our understanding is still based through the lens of our Chiron wound in Aries, wherever Aries is in your chart, for me, Chiron now is in the second house. I don't use whole sign astrology. I use the house cusps. So certain houses are bigger than others, and each house has its own degree of a sign. So my third house is Aries, but late in Aries. So Chiron in early Aries is still my second house, which is about the physical world around you. What is the object to your subject of who you are? What is all out there? So if you are still operating through the lens of your wound, when we get into Capricorn and what you're showing up to the table to create, it's going to be impacted by your understanding of reality, Sagittarius, the ninth house. And that can be seriously warped in some ways. It certainly may not be a reflection of your highest self or potential if we don't get to what that original wounding is for ourselves. And that is very individual. That is not something that can easily be generalized for anybody listening to this. That is something that you need to reach out to somebody that is an astrologer, like myself, or a reader, and to really have a dialogue about what that means in relation to everything else in your birth chart and other tools that can be brought to the table in order to bring some clarity about this. So I think it's an amazing time. Like I said, this information was coming in hot and strong. I mean, I have a headache right now just talking about it because this information has just been swirling around so much. And I feel like that there's a lot of buzzing. There's a lot of buzzing, and there's a lot of information moving around. And that's Gemini, that's the moon in Gemini. And yeah, the next moon cycle, it's going to be a different ball game, I think. So this is a great opportunity to really get clear with what that filter is and how it's shaping your understanding of the world around you, so that what you bring to the table is of your highest potential, and not something that is created out of a skewed perspective, because you're still hanging on to your Chiron wound and not willing to surrender it in order to actually heal. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stop the share here and talk to the screen. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. I so love to do this work and share with you my ideas and my own channelings around the astrology. I'm actually going to, I usually post these videos obviously on YouTube, but I post them on my Facebook page as well. And there is an Akashic tarot reading that goes along with this full moon that I actually did this morning, not realizing that it was going to be for this specifically. But it came through loud and clear that it was for this full moon. So I'm going to post that along with the video on my Facebook page. All the information about that is in the description box below. You can reach me on Facebook or my email if you're interested in a reading or reaching out to have any questions answered. You can always subscribe to my channel. You can hit the like button. That really helps spread the word and spread the information so that people have access to it, which is really what I'm all about. So happy full moon, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.